My name is Marianne Vale, and 3 days after my husband's funeral, his children asked me to sign away everything he had spent 30 years building. The house, the marina, the rental cottages by the water, the accounts, the boats, even the office chair where he used to sit every morning, drinking black coffee and pretending he was only reading the paper when he was really watching the tide. My lawyer begged me not to sign. He used words like contest, injunction, emergency petition, surviving spouse rights. He looked at me like I was a woman about to step off the edge of a bridge, but I told him no. I told him to prepare the papers. I told him that if Richard's children wanted everything so badly, they could have it, all of it. At the final probate hearing, Nathan and Peter sat across from me in their dark suits, smiling like boys who had finally gotten away with something. Their lawyer even had the nerve to pat Nathan's shoulder before the judge came in. Then the judge read one sentence from the transfer agreement. That was when their lawyer stopped smiling. That was when Nathan turned white. That was when Peter whispered, "What does that mean?" And for the first time since Richard died, I almost laughed, because it meant exactly what Richard had warned me it would mean. If they came for the inheritance before the Flowers died, I was supposed to let them have what they asked for, not what they thought they were asking for, what they actually asked for. Richard had always said his children heard money louder than truth. I just never realized how right he was until the day they came to collect. The funeral flowers were still on the dining room table when Nathan arrived with his brother. White lilies, mostly. I hated lilies. Richard had hated them too, but his daughter-in-law said they looked dignified. And grief makes people too tired to argue about flowers. I was standing in the kitchen of the house Richard and I had shared for 19 years, washing coffee cups that did not need washing, because if I stopped moving, I was afraid I would remember he was gone. The house sat outside Charleston, not directly on the ocean, but close enough to smell salt in the mornings. Richard had bought it before we married, back when Val Harbor Marina was still a struggling family business with 3 docks, a repair shed, and more unpaid invoices than boats. By the time he died, the marina had become the heart of the town's waterfront. It had slip rentals, a bait shop, a small restaurant, 10 rental cottages, 2 boat storage warehouses, and a waiting list full of people who thought paying too much for a place to park a boat counted as a personality. Richard used to laugh about that. He was 71 when he died. I was 62. People hear that and think our marriage must have been a comfortable final chapter, something quiet and convenient. They do not imagine the 19 years before that. They do not imagine the fights over payroll, the hurricane repairs, the nights we slept in the marina office because a storm surge had taken out the lower docks, or the years I spent learning which fishermen lied about fuel tabs and which rich men pretended not to understand invoices. I was not a decoration in Richard's life. I was his wife, his partner, his emergency contact, his bookkeeper when the old one quit, his cook when he forgot to eat, his driver after the surgeries, and the woman who held his hand when the hospice nurse said we were measuring time in days, not weeks. But when Nathan and Peter walked into my kitchen that afternoon, they looked at me like I was a guest who had overstayed. Nathan was the older one, 44, tall and polished in the way men become polished when they believe charm is a substitute for decency. He worked in commercial real estate in Atlanta, which meant he used words like portfolio and vision when he meant tear it down and sell it to someone richer. Peter was 41 and softer around the edges, but not softer in the heart. He had Richard's brown eyes and his mother's gift for looking wounded whenever he was being selfish. He ran a boutique investment firm that never seemed to invest in anything except his own lifestyle. Neither of them had been there when Richard's hands started shaking. Neither of them had sat through the oncologist explaining what had spread and where. Nathan sent fruit baskets. Peter sent texts that began with, "Sorry, things are so hectic right now." At the funeral, they stood in the front row and cried just enough for people to see. 3 days later, they came to my kitchen with a folder. Nathan placed it on the island between us, Marianne, he said, using my name like it tasted unpleasant. We need to talk about Dad's estate. I dried my hands on a dish towel. Your father was buried 3 days ago. Peter sighed as if I had said something emotional and therefore unhelpful. We know this is painful, he said, but dragging it out won't make it easier. Dragging it out. 19 years of marriage, and I was the one dragging things out because I did not want to discuss asset distribution. Beside a vase of dying funeral lilies, Nathan opened the folder. Dad always wanted the Vale assets to stay in the family. I stared at him. I am family. His mouth tightened. You know what I mean? Yes. I knew exactly what he meant. Blood, name, sons, legacy. The words people use when they want a widow to feel temporary. Peter leaned against the counter, folding his arms. Nobody is trying to throw you out on the street. That is comforting. He ignored that. We just need to make sure the marina, the cottages, the house, and the business accounts don't get tied up in a long legal fight. Nathan slid a document toward me. This is a preliminary agreement. It acknowledges that you won't contest the transfer of Dad's core assets to us. I looked down at the page. There were lists. So many lists. Vale Harbor Marina, the harborfront restaurant, the 10 rental cottages, the dry storage warehouse, the repair shed, the house, the 2 company trucks. The old 40-foot Chris Craft Richard had restored by hand and loved more than most people. Every line was a place where I had lived some part of my marriage. Every line was being spoken about as if it had only been waiting for Richard to die so it could become theirs. And what exactly am I supposed to live on? I asked. Peter looked relieved, as if I had finally asked the practical question and stopped being difficult. There's a life insurance policy, he said. Dad told us about it years ago. $250,000, I think. I think? I repeated, Nathan said. More than enough for a woman your age to settle somewhere smaller. A woman my age, settle somewhere smaller. The kitchen seemed to narrow around me. I looked at the window over the sink. Outside, I could see the narrow strip of marsh behind the house. Richard used to stand there in the evenings, watching the egrets step through the grass like old ladies crossing a ballroom. Nathan continued. We're willing to be generous about timing. You can stay in the house for 60 days. Generous. It gives you time to make arrangements. Arrangements, I said. Peter's face pinched. Marianne, please don't make every word sound cruel. I'm not doing that. You are choosing cruel words. For the first time, Nathan's polite mask slipped. His eyes hardened. Dad never intended for you to control the Vale name. There it was. Not the business, not the properties, the name. The thing they thought I had borrowed by marrying him. Peter reached into the folder and pulled out another sheet. There are also liabilities we need to address. I laughed once, not because anything was funny, but because the cruelty had become so neat I almost admired the efficiency of it. Of course there are, Nathan nodded to Peter, and Peter began speaking in a careful voice. Dad's medical expenses were substantial. Insurance covered some, but not all. There are outstanding bills, along with some personal tax obligations tied to the household. How much? Peter glanced at Nathan. Approximately $190,000. I gripped the towel in my hand. So I get $250,000 in life insurance and $190,000 in bills. Nathan lifted one shoulder. That still leaves you with $60,000 and no mortgage if you move quickly. No mortgage because I would have no home. No business because they would have taken it. No husband because he was in the ground. No family because they had just told me in the nicest legal language they could afford that I had never been part of theirs. I need to speak with my lawyer, I said. Nathan smiled like he had expected that, of course. We're not trying to pressure you, Peter added, but the longer you wait, the messier this gets. I looked at the 2 of them, Richard's sons. The boys whose graduations I had attended, whose children I had bought birthday gifts for, whose wives I had welcomed to my table, whose father I had loved until my whole body hurt with it. They were not grieving, they were negotiating, and that was when I remembered the last full sentence Richard had said to me before the morphine took most of him away. If they come for the inheritance before the flowers die, let them have exactly what they ask for. At the time, I thought he was delirious. He had been drifting in and out that day, confusing the hospital room with the marina office, asking whether the fuel delivery had come, asking if I had locked the dock gate. I told him to rest. He grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. "Marianne," he whispered. "The compass. If they come too soon, use the compass." Then his hand loosened. 2 days later, he was gone. The compass sat on our bedroom dresser, an old brass thing that had belonged to Richard's grandfather. It had been in his family longer than the marina, longer than the house, longer than all the fragile things people mistake for permanence. I had not touched it since he died. Now, standing in my kitchen with Nathan and Peter waiting for me to collapse or comply, I felt the memory of that brass compass like a weight in my palm. "I'll talk to my attorney," I said. Nathan closed the folder. "Good. We want this to be painless." I looked at him then, really looked. "There is no painless version of what you're doing." For a moment, Peter looked away. Nathan did not. After they left, I stood in the kitchen until the coffee and the cups went cold. Then I went upstairs. The bedroom still smelled like Richard's aftershave and the cedar blocks he kept in the closet. For a moment, grief rose so sharply I had to sit on the edge of the bed and put a hand over my mouth. I had survived the funeral. I had survived the casseroles, the polite visitors, the people saying he is in a better place as if that place had a chair for me beside him. But the empty bedroom almost broke me. The compass was where he had left it. Small, tarnished, heavy. I picked it up and turned it over. At first, I saw nothing. Then I noticed the back plate was slightly raised. As if it had not been screwed down properly, Richard had restored boats for half his life. He never left a screw loose by accident. I opened the drawer, found his pocket knife, and carefully lifted the edge. The back came free. Inside was a folded slip of paper and a tiny key taped flat against the brass. My hands began to shake. The paper had only one line written in Richard's blocky handwriting. "Locker 17, East Warehouse, bring Helen, not Arthur, not our regular attorney. Helen, I did not know a Helen." I sat there for a long time with the key in one hand and the compass in the other. Outside, the marsh was turning gold in the late afternoon light. Downstairs, the funeral lilies were already beginning to brown at the edges. The next morning, I called Arthur Bell, the attorney Richard and I had used for ordinary things, property paperwork, business renewals, tax questions, the kind of legal matters that keep a family business from unraveling. Arthur was in his late 60s, with a kind face and the nervous energy of a man who had spent 40 years preventing other people from ruining themselves. He met me in his office above a bakery on King Street. The smell of butter and coffee came through the old vents, which felt absurdly comforting. "Marianne," he said, after reading the papers Nathan had left, "do not sign this." "I thought you might say that. I'm serious." "This agreement is aggressive. It is designed to make you give up claims before we have reviewed the full estate." They said Richard wanted the Vale assets to stay in the bloodline. Arthur removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. People who say bloodline in estate disputes are usually about to do something ugly. That almost made me smile. "Can I fight it?" "Yes." "Can I win?" "Possibly. Probably if Richard made the promises you've told me about, but it will take time and they know that. They're counting on you being too exhausted to challenge them." "How much time?" "Months, a year, more, if they drag it out." "And while we fight?" His silence answered before he did. "We would petition for temporary support, but it could get complicated." Complicated. That was the word lawyers used when they meant expensive, humiliating, and slow. I looked down at my hands. I was still wearing my wedding ring. I had not decided when to take it off, or if I ever would. "What if I don't fight?" I asked. Arthur frowned. "What do you mean?" "What if I let them have the assets they want?" He stared at me. Marianne, what would happen? You would be giving up enormous leverage, but what would happen legally? He leaned back in his chair, studying me carefully. If you voluntarily disclaim or transfer your interest in the marina, house, cottages, and business entities, they would assume ownership subject to whatever obligations are attached to those assets. The word attached made something inside me sharpen. What kind of obligations? Mortgages, liens, contracts, taxes, pending claims, environmental responsibilities. Personal guarantees if properly assigned, though that depends on the structure. I thought of Richard's compass, locker 17, bring Helen. And if I asked you to draft papers that gave them what they were demanding, I would try to talk you out of it. You are doing that. I would try harder. I looked at him. Arthur, what if Richard wanted me to? He went still. Why would you say that? I did not tell him about the key, not yet, because Richard had not written bring Arthur, he had written bring Helen. I just need to know if it can be done. Arthur's expression was pained. It can be done. But I would be failing you if I didn't say this plainly. Nathan and Peter are rushing you because speed benefits them. The faster they get your signature, the less likely it is you discover something they don't want you to know. There it was. Discover. I stood. I need 1 day. Take a week. 1 day is enough. Marianne, I don't like the look in your eyes. What look? The look of a person who has decided to walk into a fire because someone left her a map this time. I did smile a little. Maybe someone did. East Warehouse sat at the far end of Vale Harbor Marina, beyond the boat slips and the restaurant. Past the fuel dock where pelicans gathered like unpaid security guards. It was the oldest building on the property, a long corrugated structure Richard had always said needed replacing. Then refused to replace because his father had built it. The padlock on locker 17 was old, but the key slid in smoothly. Inside was a canvas duffel bag, a metal document case, and a shoebox wrapped in plastic. No dust. Richard had been there recently. My throat tightened. I carried everything to his office at the marina and locked the door behind me. The office looked exactly as he had left it. Charts on the wall, coffee mug by the phone. A framed photograph of the two of us standing on Dock C after the hurricane rebuild, soaked to the skin and laughing like fools. I opened the document case first. The top file was labeled, in Richard's handwriting, for Marianne, read before signing anything. Beneath it was a business card. Helen Mercer, attorney at law. Estate litigation and financial abuse. I called the number with shaking hands. A woman answered on the second ring. Helen Mercer, my name is Marianne Vale. There was a pause. Then her voice changed. Mrs. Vale, I've been waiting for your call. I sat down. You knew Richard? I represented him for the last 9 months of his life. I closed my eyes. Of course Richard had done this quietly. The man had once hidden an entire anniversary trip from me while living in the same house. He could keep a secret when the secret mattered. I found the locker. Good, Helen said. Do you have the red folder? I looked through the stack. There it was. Yes, do not take that folder to Nathan or Peter. Do not photograph it. Do not mention it. Bring it to my office today. What is in it? The reason your husband told you to let them ask for everything? Helen Mercer's office was in an old brick building near the courthouse. Not fancy, but sharp around the edges. She was in her 50s, black, elegant, with silver at her temples and eyes that missed nothing. She did not offer condolences until after she had locked her office door. I appreciated that some people use sympathy to avoid the truth. Helen spread the documents from the red folder across her desk. Your husband first came to me because he suspected his sons were pressuring him to restructure the marina, Nathan and Peter? She nodded. They wanted him to sell the waterfront to a developer. Condos, private slips, luxury retail. Richard refused. He told me they were pushing expansion. It was not expansion, it was liquidation with prettier language. I sat very still. Helen pulled out an email. Nathan had already signed a letter of intent. with a development group, using Richard's name without authorization. The email showed Nathan's name, the developer's name, the marina's map attached like a body on an operating table. Peter's name appeared on the next document. Peter created a consulting agreement that would have paid him 8% of the sale price, Helen said. He also used marina operating accounts to cover personal debts. How much? Just under $400,000. I felt cold. Not surprised exactly, something deeper than surprise, confirmation maybe, a grief that was not new, only named, and Richard knew. He knew enough to hire me. Then we hired a forensic accountant. Helen opened another file. There is more. The marina land has an unresolved environmental issue tied to fuel tank leakage from the 1980s. Richard had been negotiating a cleanup plan with the state, manageable if handled carefully, financially dangerous if ignored. I stared at her. Nathan and Peter know about that? They know pieces. They do not understand the scope. What happens if they take the marina? They take the cleanup obligations. They take the tax exposure. They take the pending vendor claims. They take the personal guarantees attached to the operating entities. Provided they accept the transfer as written, I thought of Arthur saying obligations attached. The assets they want are dangerous. They're not worthless, Helen said. But they are not the treasure Nathan and Peter think they are. The marina can survive, but only with careful management. Honesty and money they do not have. And where is the money? Helen looked at me for a long moment. Richard placed the majority of his liquid assets in a spousal trust. You are the sole beneficiary. She handed me a summary page. I read the number twice. Then a third time, $5.2 million. My breath caught. That can't be right. It is. We never lived like that. Richard did not want his sons to know what he had saved. I pressed a hand against my chest. For weeks, I had believed I was one signature away from being homeless. Richard had left me enough to live, enough to breathe, enough to never ask his children for permission to exist. Helen softened her voice. He wanted you protected. He was afraid that if he told you everything while he was sick, they would sense it, pressure you, or accuse you of manipulating him. They already think that. They were always going to. The words hurt because they were true. Helen reached for another document. There is a final will, properly executed, video recorded. Medical capacity confirmed. It leaves the spousal trust to you, personal items to you, and gives you full discretion over whether Nathan and Peter receive any interest in the business assets. So I can give them nothing, yes. I looked at the files on the desk, emails, forensic reports, unauthorized agreements, environmental notices, tax warnings, Richard's handwriting in the margins. Then why did Richard tell me to let them have what they asked for? Helen opened a sealed envelope. The handwriting on the outside was his. Marianne, she handed it to me. I opened it carefully. My dearest girl, it began. I had not been a girl for a very long time, but Richard had called me that when he wanted to make me blush. If you are reading this, then I am gone, and my sons have moved faster than decency should allow. I am sorry. I hoped they would grieve before they grabbed, but hope is not a plan, and I have never trusted anything important to hope. Tears blurred the page. I wiped them away and kept reading. Nathan and Peter believe the marina is a prize because they never understood what it costs to keep something alive. They want the house, the cottages, the docks, the company name. If they ask for them before you have even had time to breathe, give them what they asked for, but only through Helen. Only with the full language attached. Make sure they accept every obligation, every guarantee, every liability, every debt, every consequence. Do not soften it. Do not rescue them. Do not let them make you the villain for refusing to be their victim. I have left you safe. The trust is yours. The money is yours. The choice is yours. I love my sons. But I am done allowing love to be an excuse for what they have become. You are my wife, Marianne, not a guest in my life. Not a caretaker to be dismissed after service, my wife. If they forget that, let the judge remind them. I had to stop reading. Helen waited. She did not rush me. When I could speak again, my voice sounded different. What happens if I sign everything over with the full language attached? Helen's expression did not change. They will own what they demanded. They will also be responsible for the attached cleanup plan, the vendor debts, the unpaid payroll tax issue, and the personal guarantees Richard structured into the transfer. Given their finances, they will not be able to refinance, settle, or sell quickly enough to avoid collapse. They'll lose it all, most likely, and the marina? The court can appoint a receiver if they default. You could later buy back the viable pieces through the trust. Cleanly, without their control, Richard had built a trap. No, that was not quite right. Richard had built a mirror. Nathan and Peter would only fall into it if they insisted on grabbing what they had been warned not to touch. I folded the letter, Helen. I want to give them the marina. She nodded once. Then we should prepare for court. The next week was one of the strangest of my life. Nathan and Peter became kind, not actually kind, strategically kind. Peter called me twice to check on my emotional state. Nathan sent flowers, not lilies, which meant he had either remembered I hated them or asked someone who did. His card said, "Dad would want peace." I placed it face down in the trash. Their wives joined the performance. Nathan's wife, Alicia, texted me a photograph of her children holding a framed picture of Richard, as if grandchildren could be used as legal punctuation. Peter's wife, Claire, invited me for lunch and spent 40 minutes telling me how hard this had been on the boys. The boys, they were grown men with lawyers. But in that family, men became boys the moment anyone tried to hold them accountable. I played my part. I told them I was tired. I told them I did not want to fight. I told them maybe it was best to honor Richard's bloodline. Nathan said he was proud of me. That was the hardest moment not to spit in his face. Arthur Bell called me the evening before the hearing. I reviewed the transfer language Helen sent, he said, and there was a pause. Marianne, this is not a surrender. This is a loaded gun with a ribbon tied around it. Is it legal? Yes, if they sign voluntarily, if the judge approves. If all disclosures are available, good. I need to ask you something. Are you sure you want to do this? I looked out the kitchen window at the marsh. The lilies were gone now. I had thrown them out after Nathan's second visit. In their place, I had put a bowl of oranges on the table because Richard used to say a kitchen needed something alive in it. No, I said honestly. I'm not sure of anything, but I know Richard saw this coming. And I know they were willing to leave me with $60,000 and a stack of medical bills. Arthur exhaled. Then I'll see you in court. The probate hearing took place on a rainy Thursday morning. Charleston rain has a way of making the whole city feel older than it already is. Water ran down the courthouse windows in long, uneven lines, and the hallway smelled faintly of wet wool, floor polish, and people pretending not to be nervous. Nathan and Peter arrived together, matching dark suits, matching solemn expressions, matching greed under the surface. Though Nathan hid his better, Alicia came with Nathan, wearing pearls and a black dress that made her look like she was attending a tasteful inheritance. Peter came alone. Claire apparently had a migraine, though I suspected she had simply grown tired of watching her husband sweat through his lies. Their attorney, a young man named Bradley Sloan, stood beside them with a leather binder, in the confidence of someone who had read the summary but not the trap. Helen sat on my left. Arthur sat on my right. I wore a navy dress Richard had always liked and the small pearl earrings he gave me on our 10th anniversary. Nathan leaned over before the judge came in. "Marianne," he whispered, "I want you to know this means a lot to us. I know it isn't easy." I turned toward him. "Do you?" He blinked. Before he could answer, the clerk called the room to order. Judge Eleanor Price entered. A woman in her 60s, with a direct gaze and no visible patience for theatrics. The first part of the hearing was ordinary: names, filings, estate references. Confirmation that Richard Vale had died on May 3rd. Confirmation that the final will had been submitted. Nathan's attorney stood. Your Honor, the parties have reached an agreement, Mrs. Vale has chosen not to contest the transfer of certain family business assets to Mr. Vale's sons. This is consistent with the family's desire to preserve Mr. Vale's legacy. Preserve the legacy? I wondered if Richard could hear that. If he could, I hoped he was laughing. Judge Price looked at me. Mrs. Vale, is it your understanding that you are voluntarily transferring your interest in the assets listed in Exhibit B? Helen's hand rested lightly on the folder in front of her, not touching me, just present. Yes, Your Honor. And no one has threatened, coerced, or pressured you into doing so. Nathan looked down at the table. Peter rubbed his thumb against his wedding ring. No, Your Honor, I said. The judge studied me for a moment longer than necessary. And you understand that this transfer is final? I do, Bradley Sloan smiled. Nathan smiled too. Peter's shoulders relaxed. For one brief moment, they looked like men who believed the world had rewarded them for being patient. Then Judge Price turned the page. I want the record to reflect that the accepting parties, Nathaniel Vale and Peter Vale, accept the assets in Exhibit B subject to all attached obligations, including but not limited to environmental remediation responsibilities, outstanding vendor claims, unresolved payroll tax liabilities, secured debt, and personal guarantees connected to Vale Harbor Holdings and its subsidiaries. The smile left Bradley's face first. That was how I knew he had finally read the sentence. Nathan leaned toward him. What does that mean? Bradley did not answer. The judge continued. Counsel, have your clients reviewed Schedule D? Helen slid a thick packet across the table. Bradley opened it. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slower, then stopped. Your Honor, he said, his voice suddenly dry, may we request a brief recess? Judge Price looked over her glasses. No. Nathan's head snapped up. Peter whispered, too loudly, what obligations? Helen stood. Your Honor, the full disclosure packet was provided to counsel of record at 8:30 this morning and filed with the court. It includes the state remediation notice, the fuel tank cleanup estimate, the payroll tax assessment, the vendor claim schedule, and the operating guarantees attached to the marina entity's estimate, Nathan said. The judge looked at him. Mr. Vale, please speak through counsel. Nathan ignored her. What cleanup estimate? Bradley's face had gone pale. Peter pulled the packet toward him and began flipping pages. I watched understanding arrive in pieces, first confusion, then anger, then panic. 680,000? Peter said. Helen's voice was calm. That is the low estimate. Nathan turned on me. You knew. I looked at him. I knew what you asked for. His face flushed. You set us up. No, I said. Your father did. I just followed his instructions. The courtroom went very still. Judge Price's eyes shifted to me, then to Helen, then back to the file. Bradley tried to regain control, Your Honor. My clients were not aware that these liabilities would transfer with the assets. Helen said. The draft agreement they pushed Mrs. Vale to sign last week used broad language transferring the assets with associated obligations. We accepted that structure and clarified the obligations in full. Nothing has been hidden. Nathan's voice rose. We thought she was taking the medical bills. I almost smiled. There it was, said out loud in front of a judge. Judge Price looked at him sharply. Mr. Vale, I suggest you stop speaking. Peter's face was gray. Your Honor, we need time to reconsider. Helen stood again, Mrs. Vale was given 4 days to decide whether to surrender her home, her husband's business, and 19 years of marital interest. The petitioners described the matter as urgent. We are prepared to proceed under the same urgency. Nathan stared at me with pure hatred. For once, it did not frighten me. That surprised me. His anger had always worked on me before. Not because he was powerful, but because I had spent years trying to keep Richard's family peaceful for Richard's sake. But Richard was gone, and the peace had been fake. Judge Price turned to Bradley. "Counsel, do your clients accept the transfer under the terms before the court?" Bradley whispered with Nathan and Peter. The whispering became hissing. Nathan said something I could not hear. Peter covered his face with one hand. Alicia sat frozen, pearls shining at her throat. Finally, Bradley stood. "Your Honor, my clients accept." Of course they did, because the alternative was worse. If they refused, Helen would submit the forensic report, the unauthorized development agreement, the account transfers, and the evidence of Richard's forged signatures. They would not just lose the inheritance. They would face criminal exposure. Richard had given them a choice between consequences. Not escape, consequences. Judge Price signed the order, just like that. Nathan and Peter got what they had demanded: the marina, the cottages, the house, the business entities, the debts, the cleanup, the tax liabilities, the guarantees, the burden of a legacy they had never respected but had been desperate to own. As the hearing ended, Nathan pushed back his chair so hard it struck the wall behind him. "This isn't over." I gathered my purse. "It is for me." Peter looked at me with a strange expression, something close to pleading. "Marianne, we can work something out." I paused. That was the first time he had said my name that morning without making it sound like a problem. "No," I said, "we can't." Alicia stood. "You're going to destroy this family." I turned toward her. "No, Alicia. I'm just not going to be the woman holding it together while everyone else tears it apart." Outside the courthouse, the rain had stopped. The street shone silver under a pale sky. Helen walked beside me down the steps. "You did well," she said. "I feel sick. That is not the opposite of doing well." Arthur was waiting under the awning with his umbrella. He looked at me like he had just watched someone survive a storm by becoming part of it. "What happens now?" I asked. Helen glanced toward the courthouse doors, where Nathan and Peter were still inside with their lawyer, probably trying to calculate how much disaster they had inherited. Now they discover that wanting everything and managing everything are not the same thing. The collapse took 7 weeks. That sounds fast, but greed often works quickly once the lights come on. Nathan tried to refinance the marina debt and was denied. Peter tried to negotiate the tax issue and discovered that charm does not work on government agencies. The environmental cleanup estimate rose after a secondary inspection found contamination near the old fuel lines. Vendors who had been waiting politely while Richard was sick stopped waiting. The developer Nathan had secretly courted backed out the moment the liabilities became public. Alicia filed for separation before the end of the 2nd month. Peter called me once. I did not answer. Then he sent a text. "Dad wouldn't have wanted this." I stared at the words for a long time, then I replied, "Your father wrote the agreement." He did not text again. The house was the hardest part. Not because I wanted Nathan and Peter to have it, but because I had to leave it. Every room held Richard. Every drawer contained some small piece of our life. Receipts from trips, old photographs, reading glasses he had misplaced and then accused the house of hiding, a broken watch he kept meaning to repair. I packed slowly, not because I had 60 days, because for once I had all the time I needed. The spousal trust became active 2 weeks after the hearing. Helen handled most of it. Arthur reviewed everything twice because he said he had developed trust issues on my behalf. The life insurance was not $250,000, it was $800,000 across 2 policies. Richard had also left me the liquid assets in the trust, the contents of the safe accounts, and the right to repurchase selected marina assets through a receiver. If Nathan and Peter defaulted, he had not left me helpless. He had left me a map 3 months after the hearing. Vale Harbor Holdings entered receivership 6 months after that through the trust. I bought back the marina office, the bait shop, the repair shed, and the public slips. Not the restaurant, not the cottages, not the house. I did not want to rebuild Richard's world exactly as it had been. I wanted to save the pieces that still had a soul. The public slips mattered. Local fishermen used them. The repair shed mattered. Men who had worked for Richard for 20 years still needed jobs. The bait shop mattered because it had been there since before Nathan was born, and because old men with sunburned hands should always have somewhere to complain about weather. I sold the house to a retired schoolteacher from Columbia who cried when she saw the marsh view. I thought that would hurt. It did, but it also helped. A house is not a marriage. It is only the place where a marriage happened. Richard was not in the walls. He was in the way I had learned to stand up straighter, because he loved me like I belonged beside him. The following spring, I moved into a small cottage above the marina office. Not fancy, not impressive. Mine, from the porch, I could see the docks, the channel, and the boats coming in at sunset. I could hear gulls fighting over scraps and men lying about the size of fish. It was not the quiet retirement Richard and I had imagined. It was something else, a life after the life I thought I was supposed to have. Nathan filed for bankruptcy. Peter lost his investment firm after several clients came forward. Helen said the authorities were reviewing his records. I did not ask for details. I did not celebrate their ruin. That surprised some people. They expected me to be triumphant, maybe even cruel, but I did not feel like dancing on the wreckage. I felt tired. I felt free. There's a difference. One afternoon, about a year after Richard died, a young widow came into the marina office. Her name was Caroline. She was 38, with 2 children and a stack of papers in a grocery bag. Her husband's family owned a shrimp business up the coast, and after he died, they told her she had no claim because she had never been part of the real family. She said those words with her eyes on the floor. The real family. I knew that phrase. I knew the damage it could do when spoken by people who had already decided you were disposable. I listened for almost an hour. Then I called Helen. That was how the Vale Widows Fund began. Not as a grand charity with a gala and a logo and rich people clapping for themselves. It began with one woman at my desk crying into a napkin beside a stack of documents she did not understand. The fund paid for legal consultations for widows and spouses being pushed out of family businesses. Later, we added financial education, emergency housing support, and a small grant program for women who needed time to fight without losing everything. Arthur said Richard would be proud. Helen said Richard would be amused, because nothing would annoy Nathan and Peter more than their father's money helping women stand up to men like them. I think they were both right. Sometimes people ask if I regret giving Nathan and Peter what they wanted. I do not. Not because I'm cruel, but because there are some lessons you cannot give people gently. They wanted the name without the duty. They wanted the property without the history. They wanted the business without the workers, the debts, the storms, the fuel lines, the taxes, the broken docks, the phone calls at midnight, and the people who depended on it. They wanted Richard's legacy, so I let them inherit the weight of it, and when it crushed them, they called me heartless. But I know the truth. I did not destroy them. I simply stopped protecting them from the consequences they had mistaken for opportunity. Richard once told me the sea is honest because it does not care what you think you deserve. If you take a boat out in bad weather, it will not spare you because your last name is on the dock. If you ignore a leak, it will not stay small because you are charming. If you mistake ownership for stewardship, the water will teach you the difference. Nathan and Peter learned too late. I learned just in time. For 19 years, I thought being a good wife meant keeping peace with Richard's children, swallowing insults, smoothing holidays, pretending not to notice when they treated me like a temporary visitor in my own marriage. After Richard died, I finally understood something. Peace built on your silence is not peace. It is a waiting room for betrayal. I do not live in that waiting room anymore. Now, every morning, I unlock the marina office with Richard's old brass key. I make coffee, I open the windows, I watch the tide move in like it owns everything and nothing. On my desk, beside the phone, sits the compass. The back plate is still loose. I could fix it, I never will. Some things are better left with the mark of how they saved you. Richard is gone, the house is gone. The life I expected is gone, but I am still here. And when people ask what happened to the woman who gave her greedy stepchildren everything, I tell them the truth. She did not give them everything. She gave them exactly what they asked for, and she kept what they never valued: herself.